political power in education that this country has ever seen. People saying, we're going to take more responsibility. So then a theme of moving in the direction of democracy as a way of life is moving from protest to problem solving. It's moving from simple protest to taking on responsibility. And that means looking at the very aspects of our lives. I'll just mention a couple of them tonight. It certainly means community problem solving. It means bringing together people in this community who have never spoken together before, developing ground rules that facilitate listening, active listening, dialogue, creative controversy, not standoffs. And this is what we intimate in the title of our new organization, the Institute for the Arts of Democracy. It means creating new commons, new neutral spaces. Maybe it's your public library that is now seen as an arcane depository that could become a rich center, a resource center for active citizenship in this community. It means then bringing together those who thought they could not speak together to solve common problems. In Baltimore, a community organization there based in the black churches, instead of just complaining about the failing schools in Baltimore, joined together with the business community, with the teachers union, even people high up in the school administration who they thought were part of the problem. They sat down at the table, hammered out what they called the Commonwealth, the Baltimore Commonwealth Pact, which began then to mean that parents and students shared in responsibility along with the business community for providing the environment and the incentives to keep kids in school. Certainly, I recommend that you come to hear Todd Gitlin speak, because another part of transforming democracy to a way of life instead of formal institutions that require little of us is transforming the role of media. No longer simply a molder or manipulator of our values, we as citizens must use the media as a vehicle for us to talk to each other, to hammer out differences, to see different points of view, and to also to broadcast our celebrations of traditions in our communities, our local communities, that the media must become then a vehicle for this more active form of democracy. I spoke in Ukiah, California in June, and I was struck at how they used media very creatively. This is a town that's divided between environmentalists and loggers. It's near where the Earth First people are very active. And so what they did is they had me speak one evening in a local church, and they broadcast it into the local community. And what I was then doing with that group is to ask them to talk about how they would apply this active listening form of democracy in Ukiah. Then people were encouraged who were listening to that broadcast to come the next day, the next morning, to a town meeting where people face to face began to discuss how can we create new commons where people with diverse views can come together, and out of that has come an ongoing group which is sponsoring now a play on logging that is not a partisan play, but a very poignant play about different points of view that will be followed by a facilitated dialogue with diverse people in the community. Certainly, media then is critically important in our society for reclaiming democracy as what citizens do. Of course, we cannot avoid addressing the formal political process, and that means we cannot avoid addressing the fundamental question of campaign finance. But at the local level, I think that there's much that we can do in very simple things, of restructuring the way that public hearings are held, for example, so that they really are hearings, so that people are really hearing one another. And we can look to innovative uses of computers for citizens to know what is going on in their own locale. In Santa Monica, for example, the city has paid for anyone who wants it, who has, and this is available in your library, that you can hook up to Town Hall and you can give your opinions to the city decision makers. And you can know what's going to be on the city calendar to come and express your point of view. My final area then of discussion of what it would mean to make democracy a way of life that calls from us a learning of the democratic arts is, of course, education. And this is my own emphasis in my new institute. Because I'm convinced that as long as we in school, from our earliest ages, as long as we learn democracy as memorizing the Articles of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, or memorizing how a bill becomes law in Congress, that we will never be able to solve the problem before us in this society and this world. From our earliest years now, and I see exciting examples of this in communities all across the country, most of them in public schools, not in necessarily alternative schools, where young children are learning critical thinking and active listening skills and cooperative problem solving, learning to evaluate their own progress, to see themselves developing these public arts. I was just in Southern Ohio where I met students who were part of a 6th grade class that had organized themselves as the 6th grade Amesville water chemists. And their teacher, instead of teaching chemistry and language and math as separate subjects, had encouraged the children to draw up projects that would call on all of their writing skills, their math skills, and their skills in science. And these children had been outraged by the dumping of chemicals in the town creek and set out to be the water quality control for their town. And these 6th graders became precisely that. They were the only source of information about this chemical spill in their town creek, and went on to be actually hired by local townspeople to test the water quality in their homes. That's what I mean by transforming education into active learning, active democracy, by doing democracy. So we can start now. If you are a student, don't do what I did. Never write a paper because a professor tells you to. Never write a paper because the professor tells you to. Write a paper because it's what you need to know. And here I am reminded of a beautiful statement, advice from the 19th century by Peter Kropotkin, who said, "Think about the kind of world you want to work and live in. What do you need to build that world? Demand that your teachers teach you that." So this is my point here, is that no matter what aspect of life we are working in community organizing, in our own education, in our workplace, that we, how we relate to our media, that we can in fact be actively transforming democracy into a way of life. Now, no doubt you think I have come a long way from world hunger, but I'm standing firm. I believe that we must go this deep. Hunger for me, it's like the unrelenting, it's the siren that's going off, that's telling me that the very questions that we are asking, how can we produce more? And we do produce more, and there is more hunger. How do we send more food aid abroad, and yet it does not alleviate the suffering? In other words, I'm suggesting that the very questions that we are asking are fundamentally flawed, that the solution to world hunger fundamentally lies in the restructuring of our understanding of human relationships, creating democracies in which power is more fully shared, and that means responsibility is more fully shared. That means a definition, a form of democracy that doesn't fully exist anywhere today, but from which powerful lessons can be learned from people in our own country and from every other country where people are coming together to take this next step, to move from protest to problem solving. Now, you see, I believe that we live in an era overall where many of our basic assumptions that we grew up sort of resting on, the simple answers, are collapsing. And so I see this as a time to be born, to be alive, that is compelling, and it is also liberating. I mean, in one sense, to realize that I, born in 1944, I am the first generation to be born on this planet, to know that, to be able to see that planetary life itself is at risk. And you born since then, the second generation, we share then being the first generations to realize the stakes are now ultimate. What could be more compelling then? To peel away the layers, to go as deep as we possibly can as we look for solutions. And I would echo the spirit of Bertha Gilkey. The realization that experts have failed in itself can be empowering if we look at it thusly, as Bertha Gilkey did. But my point tonight is not to put out the punitive shoulds that you should become part of building citizen democracy, democracy as a way of life. I'm suggesting something else. I'm suggesting that what I am calling forth is simply naming that which at some level we all know, that we are deprived of in this culture and in so many cultures, that the deepest deprivation may be that we are deprived of the opportunity to participate in problem solving, in making a difference. The problems seem absolutely overwhelming. So I'm not pointing a finger, you should. I'm saying let us collectively, let us cooperatively identify this need to be part of a solution. I was struck today sitting in the Minneapolis airport. You know, you get into chats with people, and I was talking about how I might not make this speech tonight. And so this young woman who works for ATT asked me, oh, what's your speech about? When I told her what my speech was about, which was rather hard to do, as you can imagine, having heard the speech, her eyes lit up and she said, oh, that's marvelous. That's marvelous. And she went on and on about how she just wants to do something. And I showed her the pamphlet from my new organization. She said, yes, what can I do? She said, and I'm not the only, everybody feels this way. And this was a person who is in real estate development for AT&T. I don't quite understand that, but I guess they're all involved in real estate. But my point is that we do not have to posit a conversion of the human heart. We do not. We can build on very distinct human capacities, and I'll close by mentioning just a few of these, that are now well documented. First is the connectedness one feels to the well-being of others. It may feel rather attenuated at times, but even at Adam Smith, you remember Adam Smith, who was in the 18th century the celebrator of self-interest, supposedly. But actually, he was a profound moral philosopher who understood that our selfhood so depended upon the approval of others that indeed we could not be happy without it. And so he believed that ourselves were integrally related to the well-being of others. And this, of course, is now in scientific studies showing that infants respond to the tears, the crying of other babies as though it were happening to themselves. And certainly it makes sense that over eons of evolutionary time, as Darwin would have it, that we did come to judge good or bad as it related to the well-being of the whole tribe because we knew our preservation depended upon it. So it is not a conversion of the human heart to be aware of our connectedness. It is simply a mindfulness and being able to believe that we can act on that connectedness. The second deep human need, a capacity that I'm suggesting tonight that we can build on, is that for purposefulness that I sensed today in the airport in this young woman. And certainly, again, psychologists are now writing books to tell us that the happiest people are the people who have a purpose larger than themselves and their immediate families. And third, creativity. And I would suggest that of all the people on earth, that we are a nation that was born by those who believed in the capacity to go beyond what exists today. As James Madison said on his deathbed, America has proved that before believed impossible. And of course, Jefferson is my dear favorite. When he said laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the human mind, we might as well expect a man to still wear the coat that fitted him as a boy, as people to remain under the barbarous regimes of their ancestors. So Jefferson believed in ultimate human creativity. So what I'm suggesting is it is an extraordinary time to be alive. The old models are collapsing. The simple formulae have failed. The easy answers don't work. The experts have been shown that the emperor wears no clothes, whatever the metaphor we want to use. There's an opening. It's an extraordinary time to be alive, a time to seize. And so I will leave you with the words of philosopher Lewis Mumford, who said, "Our only handicap will be a lack of imagination. This is one of those times when only the dreamers will turn out to be practical people." Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm interested in knowing how, you didn't really say, how did you conceptualize your institute? And how did you
My new institute?
carry out the initiative to actually bring it to being in the course it is today? I mean, how did you go about setting it up? How did you get people support? How did you solicit funding?
Okay. Well, I hope some of you can see the glint in my eye. That's about what it is right now. This is something that's been in my heart for several years. I have been working to lay this sort of mental frame. It's hard. Food First, the institute I founded in 1975, is my baby, right? I want it to thrive, to grow into old age. So this has been quite a process of coming to terms with the fact that I really needed to create a new vehicle. So right now, actually, this is my maiden speech in my being able to say publicly that I'm actually in this process. The stage I am in now is setting forth a work plan for the next 5 years and a vision statement, a set of goals that we hope will get the support that we will need to carry this out. But our vision would be that it is a multifaceted program, but that we will be creating what we're calling the Citizen Democracy Alliance. This would be a loose but connected network of people across the country, some working in education, some working in media, some working on political practice, some working in workplace democracy questions, and some at the community organizing level, like I was talking about. What we're sponsoring now is what we're calling community democracy dialogues, such as we held in Ukiah. So we are reaching out to a broad network of people, starting primarily with educators, because that's what I'm most interested in at this moment, but my colleagues, others, creating working groups of people in various fields that have similarly diagnosed the problem, and putting together working groups to see how we can infuse these ideas into a wide variety of institutions, organizations, that would begin to affect how we even talk about the problem and how we go about defining solutions, to move us away from simply, again, the protest mode into the problem-solving mode, which means that we all have to be about increasing our capacities to engage with others, listen actively with others, and so we will be creating learning tools. For just one of the things we're going to be publishing in the next 2 months is called the Believing Exercise by a professor in Massachusetts who's created a very, I don't know if you know his work, Peter Elbow, who wrote, I'm blanking out, anyway. It's a very interesting exercise for how to momentarily suspend disbelief in another person's point of view so that one can really hear it, kind of walk around inside of it, look at the world from that perspective, and then be able to see perhaps more where there are points that movement can take place on. This all actually has arisen very much emblematic of my new book, Rediscovering America's Values, which is written in 2 voices. So by the early 80s, I wanted to move out of simply a polemic mode and move more into a dialogic mode. And so I wrote in a dialogue, and to do that, I had to read all these people that I disagreed with and really think about the world from their perspective. So that's another tool then. We're trying to create a network of professors and teachers who are using that book, and how do we give tips and ideas for how to make it people be able to read that book, which is a dialogue that is more, I mean, it's not really a dialogue because it is somewhat of a standoff, but that it can be used to generate, to instigate, to ignite real dialogue where there is movement. I did have some pamphlets and things that are still in Minneapolis, but that begin to articulate the basic philosophy of the new organization, that talk about our everything from how we define power. Is power a one-way force, or is it a relational concept? What is self-interest? And I think a lot of these concepts, and then we have discussion questions at the end, could be used in a faculty department, could be used in a 4-H club, could be used in a classroom, that these are generic concepts of how do we learn to share power in order to solve common problems. And what are the arts that we need to learn? And I stress, again, the ongoing thing of evaluation, of reflection, so that we're constantly seeing democracy as a process that is unending rather than an end point or a fixed thing. Yes.
But where are you getting, like, people who said the pamphlets? I mean, right now, this is in the very beginning stages.
Yes.
Where are you getting the capital to fund this whole initiative?
Well, we don't have much. We got a grant last year. This began with a grant last year that we got that we still have a little bit of money to pay a couple salaries out of, and so we're hoping this is all what I'm doing at every spare minute of writing proposals. But eventually we want to be membership-based, much the way Food First is membership-based, but with a much more active membership. Food First is, like so many organizations, is largely paper membership. It's trying also to change that, but we want to have much more active groups of people. Like this woman I met in the Minneapolis airport, she was ready to go. She said, I want to work with you. What do I do? What can I do in Chicago? And so we'd want to be able to interview her and find people in that area who were interested in these concepts, and maybe she would be working in her school or maybe some other area. So it's in the genesis. Yes?
Another aspect of democratization of our activities, another expression might be the Hale and Hardy, the whole person, healthy person. Would you have some comment, please? We have an impression that we're moving out of the biological paradigm of health and into social ecological. And I see very much what you're saying is fitting with this. We look at people's healthy not because of their organismic health or, demedicalization of this, but the wholeness of their person and their community.
Well, yes. In other speeches I've given, I've really identified what I'm describing tonight in very much the terms you have. What I see is an emergent, one might call ecological worldview, replacing the mechanical worldview. And I see the citizen democracy vision practice as a precipitation in the social arena of this emerging alternative to a mechanical understanding. So I guess I'm just reiterating what you said. Maybe I didn't get the question part of it, but I do see what my husband, J. Baird Callicott, is an environmental philosopher, and so we've worked a lot together on the how do we put into popular terms, how do we make the mechanical worldview, which is still so much dominant in the popular mind as it becomes absolutely obsolete in the scientific world. The mechanical worldview was long out, but it still is completely dominant in the social realm, and how we think about ourselves and the natural world, how we think about government. It's all built on an atomistic and mechanical model. So what I'm trying to do is develop a popular language that doesn't take, in some speeches I give, I do take people back to the 17th century, Descartes and Isaac Newton, but what I'm trying to do is to develop a language that really doesn't require a great deal of analysis of the liberal philosophic heritage, but that can speak to people just out of our common sense that we have to go beyond simply the formal form of democracy that requires little of us. Yes, it is a social atomistic, and I think for some people it is helpful if we develop that framework of how it reflects a mechanical worldview of the isolated social atom and the defensive posture that suggests, and the inability, therefore, to understand each other's needs or even to really communicate. All of those assumptions that in my book, Rediscovering America's Values, in the introduction, I sketch out that inherited worldview, and then suggest that there is an alternative emerging that's not, but the alternative is not, what I want to stress about it, and what I want to underline many, many times, is that in the very definition of it, can't be ultimately defined, because it is ongoing. As William Hastie, the first African-American federal judge, said, democracy is not being, it is becoming. It is easily lost but never finally won. And so this is that when we talk about democracy as a way of life, part of the contrast with the mechanical notion is that you can't ultimately fix it, stop it, and describe it. It is a process that we're constantly learning and reflecting back lessons. Yes?
In the context of your discussions on democracy, how would you, the democracy context of the crisis within their peninsula right now?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not a student of the Middle East. I think that the way I understand the response of our government, certainly very predictable, is that basically to use the cliche, I guess, the old paradigm, the notion that indeed power is simply a one-way force and therefore power can overcome power. And yet, I recommend to you, there's an article in the most recent Atlantic called The Source of Muslim Rage, I think it's called. But what that suggests, and what I'm sure you're hearing also in many news sources, is that even if we were to obliterate Saddam Hussein and the entire country, that does not resolve the problem of the incredible rage that is felt toward the West and the resentment and the humiliation that is felt by so much of such a large percentage of the world's population with a culture so different from ours. And so if there's anything that this framework would begin to offer is the rethinking of power relationships, so that the simplistic notion of one force power simply overcoming one and that resolving something shows us that it is not resolved at all. Nothing can be resolved in that way. That there has to be we have to be working to create dialogue in which neither side feels humiliated, and that is the notion of relational power. That every act then, that every party then their behavior affects the other, and it is embedded in these multiple relationships, and so therefore it creates a very, very different understanding of what it means to reach a solution or to solve a problem for us. So it is that framework that I would think that we have to be talking and have to be studying really what the Atlantic tries to put out in this article, and to really what would it mean to really engage in dialogue about that addresses the sources of that rage. Yes?
Just from casual observation of your talk tonight, I sense that you feel that perhaps the gender bias in both hunger and perhaps in powerlessness in the world. If you care to comment on that, and if you do feel that there is that type of bias, how would you propose participating citizenship, participative democracy would work to reduce that?
Well, I on some level, I'm a what would you say? I'm in the framework, I would say, of a Riane Eisler in her book, The Chalice and the Blade. Do you know that book? Do any of you know that? It's historiography. It's a book that claims that at one point in our ancient history that there was much more of a balance of what many would call the female and the male energies, and that we are in a period now of struggling to come out of a long period of male dominance, which is reflected in this notion of one-way power, zero-sum, power over rather than power with, you might say. And in some ways, I think that this emerging ecological worldview, as the definition of ecology being about relationships, that is for many people a useful way to talk about it in terms of a balancing of male and female principles, if you will. I don't usually use that in my own talks because I haven't developed it, I guess, as my own personal my own public framework, while it might be a personal framework. But I think that much of what is embodied in the citizen democracy philosophy is that which many feminists and ecofeminists in particular have identified as relating to the female principles, shall we say, of more a cooperative approach and more nurturing approach. So I share some of that sentiment, although I haven't developed it in a way that I can present it in a coherent way. It's more of an intuitive sense I have about the changes, and to what extent people find that framework useful, then they should pursue it. Yes?
I'm curious if at all you feel like you come full circle or something.
Yes. I do. 20 years, some odd years. I'm in the process of writing the question, have I come full circle? I'm writing now the 20th anniversary introduction to Diet for a Small Planet, where I'm trying to explain this circle. And yes, in many ways, I feel I have come full circle, and it's very exciting because you see, I feel like I've come full circle, but I've moved along a track, and so I feel like I'm really starting my life over. But starting it over at middle age is so much better than starting it over in your 20s. So, I mean, you've caught me, besides being exhausted and very warm, this is one of the most challenging, most frightening, and the happiest period of my life. And I just feel that, I don't know, I just feel this incredible hope, despite what I see all around me. I just feel that I can say things I couldn't say 20 years ago. I feel like people are more honest when you tap something that's really true in people. They respond in a much more honest way. I just feel that precisely because things are so bad, yes, I've come full circle, but we're not where we were 20 years ago. People are much more sophisticated, and there's just so much more to work with. And part of what's inspiring me are people like these 6th grade Amesville water chemists. And they're not alone. I mean, this conference I went to recently, I met a lot of people like this. So, yeah, I've come full circle, but hardly back to the same place. Well, since it looks like we're winding down, I passed around a sign-up sheet, and my nice desktop published sign-up sheets for Building Citizen Democracy are somewhere in the air right now. So if you signed on that sheet, you'll probably get, in the next year, next 6 months, you'll probably get a letter from the newborn Institute for the Arts of Democracy, and I'm sure you'll also get a mailing from Food First, and I hope that you will join both organizations, and that I hope Food First will have a long life, and I hope that that this is the beginning and of something very new for not only myself, obviously. So thank you for your attention and support. Thank you.